to get started since it got quiet. You guys can continue going about your time. I'm Carla Campbell. I'm the Stated Clerk of the Presbytery, and I've been doing this for a little over 11 years now. And some of you, I think, have been clerking almost as long, and you're at new Clerk of Session training when you could probably lead it. But that is great. We appreciate it because, true confessions, I've never been a Clerk of Session. So maybe a question will come up. Come on in. Welcome. We have some handouts. We have some refreshments. Get a seat. We appreciate you all making the effort to be here on this yucky day. We had a tough call this morning. Like, do we cancel? What do we do? Because February is really tough. But it's the start of the new year. Many clerks start in the new year. And if we wait till spring, they're going to be left out there on their own. And it can be a bit of a lonely job because you sort of feel like a lot is falling on you and you don't have anybody to ask. So part of this is to give you people to ask, not just up here, but hopefully we have you set up with tables around your table. We're going to take a break to get refreshments. You can meet some other folks and network. And I'll tell you, I meet periodically with the stated clerks of the other presbyteries in our synod. And at the national level, we interact and have an email group. I am learning stuff all the time and stealing ideas all the time. Because when I see, we do the same kind of minutes exchange that you guys do with another congregation. I do it with another presbytery. As I'm reading their minutes, I go, that's a great plan. I'm stealing that right now. So this is what we're here for. My associate stated clerk, who's been doing that for what? About 5 years now. Reverend Dr. Trent Hancock is here as well. He helps out. He is the one you see faithfully taking the minutes at the presbytery meeting and maybe the one saying, stop, can you repeat that? When people get up there and talk really fast and the poor person trying to take the minutes doesn't know what they're saying. So he is going to open us with prayer.
Glad to. Let's pray. Gracious and loving God, we give you thanks for this day, for this opportunity to gather as your people and as your church, to learn together, to share experiences with one another as we seek to do this important work of leading congregations and helping session do their work of deliberation in the Spirit of Christ. Lord, be present with us as we learn together this morning. Give us wisdom and understanding, and at the end of the day, send us home with safety and with your peace. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. I put an agenda for the day on the back table if you want to look for that. There are also some handouts back there. This is the first year that we've been in person. Like, oh, I can actually print some stuff out. But there's also a lot more online under the Stated Clerks page. I also wanted to introduce you to some very important folks who are in the back of the room. They are, I'll let you stop wiping your nose, my assistant, Leslie Bogdan. Leslie is the person who does presbytery attendance, presbytery registration, minutes reading, all of that stuff. Some folks are still emailing Jenny because you used to email Jenny. When Kathy Nelson retired at the end of the year before last, Leslie's been here a little over a year, we switched things around. So Leslie supports my office and Jessica's office, the general minister. So if you have any clerk-related stated clerk office questions, please email Leslie. Also back there is our business administrator, Elizabeth Merriweather. She's the person that you talk to if you have questions about your tax exempt letter, your sales tax certificate. If you're thinking about selling your manse or you want to get a loan, call Elizabeth right away to start getting the forms ready for presbytery approval, or if you need copies of things, or if you just have questions. Elizabeth and I do a little tag team, sort of like, oh, this is more on your end, but she's the more technical financial. I do a little more of the legal. We try to work it out. And sometimes both of us sit there and say, well, I don't know. Let's see what we can figure out. So start with either one of us with stuff like that, and we'll send you on to the right one if we're not there to begin with. I do want to let you know there is a brand new handbook for Clerks of Session. We could print it. Cover your ears, Elizabeth. I printed it in color, so it'd be prettier.
It's very nice. It's very pretty, yes.
I do update it throughout the year. Oh, we have some more folks coming. Okay. I am so excited that people were able to make it here safely. And our schedule is just a guide. We will get through. And if you have any questions and you're a shy person, you can always call me later or email me, text me. My phone accepts text. My presbytery number, 412-323-1405. And there's a lot on the website which we will be updating. The new one is not on the website yet because I just finished it Thursday. So we will update it and get it on the website as soon as we can. And we do update it throughout the year if things change, especially requirements from General Assembly. I'm going to go off script while they're coming in. We're in a General Assembly year. You saw we voted on a potential overture at our December meeting. We have 2 more coming up at our February meeting. We've elected our General Assembly commissioners, and they're going to be getting trained soon. So General Assembly will meet this summer in Milwaukee. I'm sure I'm glad I'm going there in the summer and not now. So there's that. The next one, though, if you want to angle your way, if your congregation may be up to be we choose our commissioners on rotation. For pastors based on seniority, and for congregations, we go in alphabetical rotation. And there's some requirements for presbytery attendance and things like that. But in 2028, they're going to Puerto Rico. So, if you want to angle your way into being a commissioner, now's the time to get your plan in place. So I'm just going to start. It's not things that you're taking notes at, but when I look at the job of the Clerk of Session, I came up with 3 R's: rules, records, and relationships. And we are not going to read through the Clerk of Session handbook because I cannot imagine anything that would put you to sleep faster. But we start on page 5 with role of the Clerk of Session, and I really tried to put in some from the basics to, things you might not have thought of. And I tried to put in some useful information in there, like item number 2, get yourselves a current book of order. If your book of order, I should say, looks like this without the spiral binding, there you go. Didn't I give you a spiral bound?
I prefer it.
Oh, okay. So we take them to Kinko's and have them spiral bound so that you can sit them on the desk when you're working and do this. Trent is old school. He doesn't like the spiral binding. But if it doesn't say 2025, 2027, it's not the current book of order, and there have been some significant changes. You can download it for free. You can order copies for $10. I think there's a shipping charge unless you order a whole bunch. And you can also get a download in large print, apparently. I don't think we have any congregations from other languages here, but our official languages for the PCUSA are Spanish and Korean in addition to English, so they will have it in Spanish and Korean, and they will have other languages upon request and as they get them. Is everything okay? Okay. So this is one source of rules. Our Constitution for the PCUSA also includes the Book of Confessions. This is the current Book of Confessions, and the Bible. This is mine from our staff Bible study. It's a mess. It is not lack of respect. It's just well thumbed and used and loved, and I may or may not have dropped it once, which is not good for the binding. So that's the source of rules. Our subsidiary rules, we also follow Robert's Rules of Order. I have increased my nerd level. You can buy these spiral bound, but I bought the little tabs on Amazon to just up the nerd level a little bit more and make it easier to find things on the fly. I also recommend, there's a number of cheat sheets and things you can get, but this is a very nice Robert's Rules of Order in brief. It's very concise. It's simpler. It covers most of the highlights. I get these for each of our moderators. I don't give them the big book because that's my job, but this will help them feel comfortable, so I recommend that. The other rules that you need to deal with are your rules of your particular church, your corporate bylaws, if you have standing rules, if you have other policies and procedures. You are going to be the source for all of that, and you are going to be the one that people come to and say, hey, somebody wants to bring their miniature horse to be the ring bearer at the wedding. What does our wedding policy say? They're going to turn right to you and look. You laugh, but we had somebody bring a Great Dane, and they wanted the Great Dane to be the ring bearer at Southminster, which they eventually worked it out, but the only problem was They brought a kennel for the Great Dane, which was good, so that when he wasn't on, he had a safe place to be. But then they left it at the church while they went on their honeymoon. We're like, a Great Dane kennel is not a small thing to be walking around. So, yeah. Page 7 talks about responsibilities of the Clerk of Session, and that's starting with the most important that you think of is keeping a record of the session. I call the session minutes your most important for right now records, because that's where you're going to need to go. Did we do this? Did we authorize this? What has the session done? The next one, rolls and registers, are your historical record, the most important, because after a couple years, with a few very minor exceptions, nobody really cares what the session did at its November meeting. But people really want to know where great grandma, who was, baptized at that church, do we have the maiden name of her mother? We can't find that. So things like that. We get calls about every month at the presbytery. I'll go through that. And there's some other things in there. So we talked a little bit about rules. We've talked a little bit about records. The other is relationships. Because every church has to have a clerk of session. Not every church has a pastor. Certainly every church doesn't have a full-time pastor. Many pastors are now in shared ministry. They're splitting their time between two different calls. Or, like Trent, they're splitting their time between a ministry job and another job. So they're not going to be in the church office. Here's another secret. If you even have a full-time minister and they're in the church office full-time every day, they're not doing their job as minister, because that's not what they're called to do. So you are the person that I'm going to call when I say, hey, we need to know this or that from the church. You're also the person that is all we know, we can count on if we have a question. So I'm the person you can always call. I'm always going to call you guys. Do you want to talk about pastors since we started?
Yeah. So I guess I'm maybe the only pastor in the room here, but the pastor, can everyone hear me okay? The pastor-clerk relationship is very important and is one that in various contexts has looked different ways in my experience. But in general, the clerk and the pastor as moderator, and it might be your installed pastor or it might be the presbytery appointed moderator in your whatever the case may be, the clerk and the pastor are going to be working closely before, during, and after session meetings especially. And actually, if you go to page 7, which is that responsibilities page that Carla was just referring to, there are several, I kind of just went through the list and highlighted ones that specifically relate to the clerk and pastor sort of relationships, which is very important. So, for example, number 12, bringing official correspondence to the attention of the pastor. There's some mailings and emails and things that go to everybody. There's some of that information that will go only to the clerk. Some of those things the pastor might also get, but this is where helping the pastor know, hey, we got this notice from the presbytery that we need to be doing this. The pastor might not be aware of it. You shouldn't assume that he or she does know about it. Number 13 is another example of keeping a list of unfinished business. Sessions sometimes will discuss a matter, go round and round for 45 minutes at a meeting, and the result is no decision, right? The result is not even a decision to keep talking about it, which, by the way, if you talk about it for 45 minutes, you probably should make some kind of decision about it, even if the decision is to bring it up next time, right? Okay. But helping the moderator track those things so they don't get lost, that is a helpful thing. Number 14, advising on parliamentary procedure. That is the clerk's role in the setting of a session meeting. Now, the moderator should also know these things, especially if they took the polity class, for example, but they may not. And also a lot of your meetings, and the Book of Order allows for this, Robert's Rules is a helpful guide, but a lot of smaller sessions deliberate and reach almost every decision by consensus, for example. So a lot of the formality of Robert's Rules isn't always in play, but when it is in play, the moderator might want to turn to the clerk and say, time out, and sort things out. I mean, definitely I've done that in session meetings where the clerk and the pastor are usually sitting pretty close to each other, and that's on purpose so that there can be moments of consultation in the middle of the meeting sometimes, and that's okay, even if you have to say, hold on 1 minute while we figure it out. I think that's helpful. Number 17 on that list, assisting the pastor in preparing the agenda. I'm going to talk about that separately in a minute. And number 19, reminding of annual actions. Many congregations that I've served, and maybe you do the same thing, have sort of a calendar of regular decisions that are made. Does anybody have such a thing? Some of you? Okay, so for example, every January at the session meeting, we're going to need to elect this person, approve this thing, whatever it might be. Every October, we're going to be doing X, Y, and Z. And just having that calendar, and you can probably create such a calendar by just looking at recent minutes and seeing that, well, every October is when we have the first reading of the budget, for example. If that's established, it just helps planning for the meeting. So I think having a calendar of those sort of regular decisions is very helpful. I know I sometimes look at it, it's like, oh, gee, it's October. We need to be thinking about these things. And I wouldn't necessarily have that on my mind if it wasn't for that. And then number 20, work with the pastor to prepare session highlights. That's my paraphrase. So, a lot of what happens in the session meeting, decisions and information that is shared, sometimes it doesn't ever leave the room, right? Not everything that's discussed maybe should leave the room, but the session does have the obligation to share its work and decisions with the congregation. Some churches do that with, their weekly email blasts or their monthly newsletters or a combination of those things, the annual meeting, which we'll talk about again in a little bit. But if there's a regular process for sort of distilling what's important about the last session meeting and sharing that with the congregation, including them on it, having a regular way of doing that, that's something that the clerk and the moderator can work together on. Say, what are the 3 takeaways that we would want people to know from this meeting? That's a much better approach, I would say, than waiting until the annual meeting, the 3rd week of January or so, and saying, oh, by the way, here's all the things we did in the last year. And people might respond like, well, why didn't we know about this? So I think keeping regular updates to the congregation is a helpful thing to do. And you as the clerk can help determine, not that you need to write the article, not that you need to do all the steps, but consulting on what those items are, if that makes sense. Okay, I'm going to move on to, well, before I move on, any questions or comments about the whole interactions with the pastor? Hopefully, those of you who have been doing this for a while do interact with your pastor when it comes to planning meetings and things. Again, I've had various experiences with that as well.
Can I pop in just one
Yeah,
second?
please.
I know of
Yeah.
some situations where the clerk and the pastor have a standing meeting, like maybe the week before the session meeting or something that, we'll get together after church or, we'll have coffee on Monday so that they know they have this standing meeting to talk about what's going to happen and what the plan is.
And I'm going to get to that when we talk about organization and planning of session meetings.
Sorry.
But no, that's okay. No, it's good. Yes. And that could be by email. It could be a phone call. It can be lots of things. So the clerk and the vacant pulpit, that is my next topic. So how many of you are in situations where you do not currently have an installed pastor? Which is different from the pulpit being vacant. But how many of you have something other than an installed pastor?
Which could be what we call covenant, interim, temporary.
Any interim, temporary, covenant. Okay, I thought there would be more, actually. Yeah, you've been through it. Yeah. Okay. So sometimes, whether it's installed or temporary pastor leadership that you have, there are times when there is no pastor in place, right? And there was this phrase in the handbook which caught my attention, that the clerk is the continuing ecclesiastical officer of the congregation, which sounds really scary. But in the absence of a pastor, the stated clerk is the continuing ecclesiastical officer. And so there are responsibilities that are there always, but then are maybe brought to the fore when there's a pastoral vacancy. And one of the main things is to see that worship happens and that there's somebody to preach. Now, in practice, there's probably other people in your congregation who have that responsibility. Maybe it's the worship committee chair or other people. But ultimately, that would be a thing that as a clerk, you would want to have your pulse on and know, is that being taken care of? And even though we live in Pittsburgh and there's lots of ministers around, it can still be hard sometimes to find somebody on a particular Sunday to fill the pulpit, and maybe questions about, well, could we ask so and so to do it, but they're not a minister? Questions like that. Those are things that might maybe even involve a call to the stated clerk if you're not really sure. But seminary students certainly can preach, and others as well. Also, if you're in an interim period or working with a temporary pastor who's coming in, doesn't know the congregation well, doesn't know the institutional history, the church's history very well, you as a clerk can be a very helpful resource in helping that brand new person get up to speed on everything. Here's how we do it here. Here's when we decide these things, the institutional history. It's hard to be the institutional history bearer when you're a brand new clerk, for sure. But certainly those of you who've done it for a while, you've been there. You've been tracking the minutes. You've been keeping track of these things. And so you are a real resource, especially to a new pastor. So moving then to organizing and planning session meetings, my favorite. On pages 9 and 10, there's a great timeline there. And that's a good example, and that might be something that you would adjust for your own context. I've been in churches where the session packet that we put together is 18 pages long, with like all the supporting materials, budgets, and reports. I've also been in congregations where there's a single piece of paper with a few lines on it, So there's a wide range of agendas and things. But the timeline on pages 9 and 10 is very helpful. And some of those things, maybe all of them, you might say, should be done in conjunction with the pastor, or maybe there's a divide and conquer kind of approach that you take. I'm not going to go through that in great detail, but I would invite you to look at that, underline some key things, maybe think about how to adjust that timeline that fits your own practice and your own context better. A few things to highlight, though, as you work with the pastor to organize and plan session meetings. And I do think both of those words are important, organizing and planning. Just like in the presbytery meetings, which aren't perfect by any stretch, but they're complicated, they're big meetings, there's a lot of organization and a lot of planning that goes into it. There's a pre-presbytery meeting where all the main players are in one place to talk about what could happen, what do we expect to happen, are we ready for this eventuality. That's not going to happen to the same extent in a session meeting, but that sense of anticipation of what might happen in a session meeting, especially if there's a controversial issue, perhaps, it's important to think about that. How are we going to handle this if it comes up, if Elder Smith brings this up, or if we're going to have a contentious vote about something? Planning for that, not scripting it completely, but anticipating what could happen is very important, I would say. So some things that can really help make a session meeting go well. Developing a consent agenda. How many of you have a regular consent agenda in your session? Okay, good, lots of you. A consent agenda, for those of you who may not know, is basically routine matters that are gathered together, voted on in one omnibus motion, so that you're not just making motion after motion to do routine things. If there's something that people want to remove from that, then you can discuss it. And sometimes I've seen, people put things on consent agendas that probably need to be discussed, even if they're not controversial. So there's some judgment there. But it not only streamlines and saves time, but well, that's what it mainly does. But then that creates time for bigger, more important discussions that sessions could be having in meetings. The calendar of actions I've also mentioned. Maybe it's even a good idea at the end of the agenda to say, well, next meeting's such and such a date, but also here are the three or four things that we already know we're going to be talking about next month, just to kind of give people a preview so they're thinking about that. And another important thing, it's goes way down to page 18 actually, which is a list of what to have with you at the session meeting, which I think is just a very practical, helpful list of things, because I can't tell you how many session meetings I've been at where a question has come up and the clerk doesn't have the minutes from 2021, but didn't we talk about that a whole bunch of years ago? What did we decide about that? So having minutes available, having the book of order, having those calendar of actions, having even things like the church directory. I think, just if there's a reference, like is so-and-so a member, if it comes up, having those resources in your Clerk of Session folder or bag, whatever, at the meeting could be very helpful. So I definitely have had the practice of meeting with my clerk in some form or another before the meetings, so that by the time the meeting happens, people have a packet that they've received in email that has the minutes and the reports and the agenda items, and every committee has submitted both information items but also any action items. And this is really helpful to you as a clerk, that if there is a motion coming from the property committee about something, it's helpful to have the actual language of that motion ahead of time, printed in the agenda, so that people also are clear about what we're talking about, what we're voting on, but also it helps you as a clerk as you're taking minutes. Kind of like the Presbyterian meeting, 97% of the minutes are written before the meeting happens, right? And, because depending on how a vote goes or doesn't go, things have to be changed, but most of it's there because these are the matters before the body.
It looked like that troubled you. Yeah. Oh, okay.
I mean,
there's some blanks that we have to fill in.
I just look busy up there a lot of the time, but I mean, a lot of the
blanks.
There's places to fill in, and sometimes the debate goes a different direction and the vote goes a different direction, and there's an amendment, and obviously those, but you have a baseline to start with, is what I'm saying, because if you're really trying to start drafting the minutes from, okay, who's present and typing all the names in and everything, you're already behind, right? So meeting with the pastor to talk about or communicating by email with the pastor about what business is expected might also help you determine how to order the meeting. And we do this in the presbytery, for example. Controversial or discussions that are going to take more time, we try to move to the earlier part of the meeting, right? So you don't want to spend the first hour and a half doing routine things, and then when everyone's really ready to go home, finally get to the thing that's everybody's worked up about. You can't totally predict that, but that's part of the planning and organizing of the meeting. So those are some things that I would suggest, and I do really highly recommend that you send something out ahead of time, whether it's the agenda or even the whole packet, so to speak, of all the supporting materials, having them available on the day as well. How many of you do that now? Does your church send them out ahead of time? Okay, many of you do. It can be difficult if not everybody on the session is really on email all the time, or there's challenges like that, which is why you always need to have that other way of communicating it for people who don't have access or as much familiarity with using email. I've had elders come to me out of concern when they've been asked to serve on session and say, but I don't really do email and all that stuff very much. Can I still be on the session? Well, of course you can. We just have to make sure that we get that information to that person other ways, right? It should not be a disqualifying factor that you don't use email, right? Because many times those people have wonderful things to offer. Any other experiences that you all want to share for the group about how you've worked with your pastors in planning and organizing session meetings that might be a helpful tip to anyone? I think it's always good to learn from the group. Yeah. Oh, sorry. We can get you on the recording. Thank you.
I thought we were going to have to repeat the question.
Can
Okay.
you hear me? Can you hear me
Yeah.
now?
Yes.
If you have a tech-savvy group of session members, we have found that using Google Drive, and does anybody else use Google Drive, and having tabs on the side, we just learned about tabs, and it's very helpful.
Impressive, yes.
Rather than having multiple documents in the drive, you can have them in tabs. So that's been helpful.
Yeah, good. And it might take some training to get everybody up and running on that, but if everybody has the same access to all the information and you have Wi-Fi in your meeting room, I mean, you can really have an informed meeting, right? So that's a great tip. Yeah, good. Let's move then to planning and organizing congregational meetings. So you all know that the annual meeting of the congregation is a requirement, and there's rules about how to give notice for that, and the quorum is determined by the moderator, but the moderator is probably going to turn to the clerk and say, do we have a quorum? And and the clerk's going to know. This can be an issue sometimes. Actually, April, you may remember at Glenshaw some years ago, we had to change our quorum because we had a quorum in our bylaws which was nearly impossible for us to achieve. And long story short, we changed the bylaws to make a more livable quorum. But there was one meeting which was just kind of embarrassing where we couldn't actually do the business we had to because we didn't have a quorum. And so, but you can't just say, oh, well, it doesn't really matter, right? You need to make sure that you do.
So
Yes.
can I say something
Yeah,
there?
please.
My home congregation is Southminster Presbyterian Church in Mount Lebanon. And we were in the midst of a congregational meeting where we had a quorum at the beginning. And somebody raised the question. They said, I don't think we have a quorum anymore, as we were debating something. Now, there is a myth that is going around, well, once the moderator declares a quorum, that's it. You always have a quorum. No. It's the responsibility of those running the meeting. The clerk, if the moderator looks out and says, well, there's only 4 people left, I'm pretty sure that's not a quorum, then they can just do that. But at Southminster, we had to count, and we were 1 short. So we had to stop the meeting because we no longer had a quorum, even though we properly did have a quorum when the meeting started. Any member of the body, as is what happened at Southminster, can bring that to the moderator's attention and ask for a quorum count.
Good. That's a great illustration. And yeah, I mean, if depending on what game is on that afternoon or evening, I mean, let's be real. That's what happens, right? They were all here a minute ago, but what happened?
We do have a question.
Oh,
Hold
yeah.
on, we get the microphone.
So what do you do if you don't have a quorum, or if you don't have a quorum halfway through the meeting?
So you can't legally conduct business without a quorum. So you have to stop your business, or you don't start the meeting if you don't have a quorum. Now, what do you do if, like at Glenshaw, they had a ridiculously high quorum requirement and they didn't get a quorum, and they tried again and they didn't get a quorum? Pennsylvania law actually has a mechanism, which we went through with one of our smaller congregations, Concord Presbyterian Church, to there's ways that you have to advertise the meeting and things you have to do, but once you follow all of those steps, then anybody who's there for I think it's like the 3rd time you do this, constitutes the quorum and you can legally do business. But otherwise, if people just left because the Steelers were about to kick off, that's hint number 2 that we probably should put in there. Don't schedule your congregational meeting after worship if the Steelers are still playing. Because some of us have seen folks, go up for communion and out the back door on a Steelers Sunday. But yeah, you can't do business without a quorum. Now, if you didn't notice that the number fell by 1, nobody's going to have a remedial action, and you can't go back in history. Somebody has to bring that to the moderator's attention and say, I believe we no longer have a quorum. Let's determine that.
And the meeting could proceed on an informational basis.
Correct.
It's just making decisions that you need to have a quorum for. Yeah. Did you? The question was, is there a range of quorums? Yeah. Yes. I mean, do you want to speak to that?
Yes. We recommend, especially if you're redoing your bylaws, and we're going to be doing this when we're in the process now because we just did strategic planning for the Presbytery of redoing our bylaws, use a percentage. So that way, as your membership changes, your quorum number changes. If you use a hard number, then you're stuck. Do you have a follow-up? There's no requirement. There are guidelines, and there are sometimes different quorums for different meetings. Former versions of the Book of Order, we have been under what is still referred to as the new form of government since 2011. The Presbyterian world is the only place where something from 2011 is new. That used to provide for a smaller quorum for reception of new members. Many congregations still do that because you have the new members class after worship one week, and then you do this and you do that, and the session approves, and then you have the meeting, but you need a certain number of session members to move and approve it. If you haven't had a chance to do that, some congregations provide that just for this purpose, the quorum will be X number of people. So that's session, not congregation. Nope. Wait.
Could you just wait for the microphone, just so we could? Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, we use 10% in our bylaws. Is that typical or what? Yeah.
I would say 10% is the number I see most frequently. All of this is different for different congregations. There are different trust levels. Some congregations where you've had perhaps a lot of division and trauma, you may have less of a trust level. You may also make the call to say, look, even if our fully legal, very responsible, normal for everyday business number is 10%, we are talking about something that is very divisive within the congregation, and there was a snowstorm, so some people who would have wanted to be there genuinely couldn't. When you're talking with the moderator and the clerk of session, this is one of those discretion things to say, you know what, we're not going to go forward with a 10% quorum on an issue that people are just going to be fussing and want to revisit anyway. Now, for the congregational purposes, those are very, very slim things that the congregation votes on. That is not the budget. That's whether to sell property. But if the question is whether or not to sell the church building, which is something that the congregation, and some of our congregations have done it, and it is the best thing for their ministry, but it is often controversial because there are going to be people in that congregation who, no matter what, the fact that there are 20 people sitting in a congregation that was built to hold 2,000 and we can't afford the heat and all this, they want to have their funeral in that sanctuary and that's it. And so something like that, I would not go forward with a bare minimum quorum just as a matter of congregational health. So, but that's discretion of the moderator and the clerk.
Right. Yeah. Thank you. So just a few more notes on congregational. No, that's great. This is all good. So the annual meeting, as we were saying, is a requirement, and the primary purpose of it is to share information, and it's also where you're probably going to elect elders and deacons and the nominating committee for the next year, and perhaps vote on the pastor's terms of call. By the way, if there's no changes to the pastor's terms of call, you don't need to vote on it, but some people do anyway. But as Carla also mentioned, the session is responsible for reporting about the budget to the congregation, but the congregation does not vote on the budget. And sometimes I've noticed that if you even ask people in the parking lot right after the meeting, do you all just vote on the budget? They think that they did, even if they didn't, because they heard about it and in their minds. And I also know churches that do vote on the budget, and I just like, ugh. Yeah, right, to receive it, right, which is right. So the annual meeting is about report. The requirement is a report annually on the work of the session. The 30-page annual reports that many churches put together and have always done, it is not actually a requirement. What is a requirement is that information is shared. I mean, the annual report is a vehicle to do that, but there's no mandate to put together this massive document. I only say that because some congregations have gone away from making such a massive document and just give oral reports or do a simplified report, and that's okay as long as the information is shared. And so at the meeting, there'll be reports, there might be questions, there'll be votes on certain things, receiving the budget, not voting on the budget. But one of the things you as a clerk should know, and Carla alluded to this, is what business is appropriate to a congregational meeting, because it is a pretty small list of things that that are appropriate for congregational meetings. And so if somebody wants to talk about some other issue and the moderator doesn't just rule that out of order, you as a clerk might need to whisper in the moderator's ear and say, I don't think we were supposed to do that, or at least consult about it. If somebody just has a beef about something and they think this is my chance to bring it up, you might hear that beef, but you might also say, well, we'll refer that to the appropriate session committee or whatever the case might be. But, and I tell this to pastors as they're preparing to be moderators too, that, this is one of those places where you do need to sort of hold the line and not be bullied, honestly, and to say, well, that's out of order. It's not a personal statement to say something's out of order. It's just a fact. Like, that is not an appropriate item of business for this meeting. And the moderator might then need to explain why that is. It's not just because we don't want to talk about it, but it's just not within the realm of things. So those are the annual meetings. There's also could be special or called congregational meetings, and those would primarily maybe be things like, well, selling the church's property, for example, but hearing a recommendation on the PNC to elect a pastor. That's probably the most common one. The notice for the meeting follows the same sorts of rules that you have for other meetings, and also should include the purpose of the meeting. And so for these meetings, the stated purpose is the purpose, not as long as we're here, let's do these other 5 things, right? And that is tempting because it's hard to get the congregation together. But for these special meetings or called meetings, called meetings, I should say, sticking to the stated purpose is very important. And like the session meeting, but maybe perhaps to a larger degree, there is still the planning and organizing, the anticipation of what might go wrong. Like the congregation is going to elect the members of the PNC, but if this one person is on the list of nominees, these 3 other people who are on the PNC are going to resign because they don't want to serve with that person. This is a real life experience I've had. What do you do? How do you prepare for that? You call the stated clerk and consult with her, is what you do, as I did. And you make sure you have ballots ready, and you are prepared to, you should have ballots ready anyway, but be prepared to anticipate what might happen. Of course, none of that happened, and it was fine. But something like electing a PNC is complicated because it's a representative group, right? It has to be men and women and ages and all sorts of other diversity. And so you can't just replace 3 people with 3 other people. You need to be aware of the fact that you're still maintaining that balance. So it's a complicated thing. And what do you do if there are a slate of elders for the class of 2028, but there's 3 nominated for the 3 slots, but there's 4 people, then a 4th is nominated from the floor, right? You need the moderator needs to be prepared for that, and ballots may need to be required and things like that. So these things do happen, and the more that you're prepared for them to happen and know what you're going to do if they happen, the better you are. And that might be something that you and the moderator will discuss, because chances are you probably will get wind of these things before the meeting. You'll have a sense that somebody's planning to do this thing that might throw a wrench into things, right? I don't want to scare you, but just, again, anticipating what could happen so that you and the moderator are not in the front of the room going, we're not sure what to do, And it's okay, and I tell moderators this too, it's okay to just say, could you just give us a minute while we confer? I think that's a really smart thing to do. The moderator doesn't need to rule on the fly without all the information. Encourage the moderator, if they're about to do that, said, maybe let's just take a minute and talk through this real quick. Because usually you can figure it out and say, okay, here's what we're going to do, right? So that can be very helpful. Are you talking about hybrid and e-voting at all later, or not really?
We not really, but
okay.
We can.
Just a note about that. So that's mentioned on page 11, and I know many of you have had different experiences with that. There's certain things that need to be in place for this to work properly. People need to be able to engage in the discussion if there's voting. The rules for how to do these meetings need to be established ahead of time. And how many of you know that you have such rules established? Okay. Yeah. So that's
Where it needs to be.
that's where it needs to be. So maybe that's a note for you all to go back and investigate in your own context, because, again, some of you may just be doing it and there's never been a problem in it, no harm, no foul. But if there's ever a question about, can we decide such a thing in this way, and it's not spelled out, somebody could then challenge the decision made if it was not made according to your own rules. So that might be a thing to investigate and perhaps get the ball rolling on getting a change in. Those are main things that I had about congregational meetings. So any questions about, many of you probably just lived through your congregational meetings recently, right? You're on the other side of it. So anything else anybody wants to add, anecdotally or otherwise, that might be helpful?
I think since the pandemic, most folks are not doing hybrid congregational meetings.
Right.
It's mostly been in-person congregational meetings. But when we had a pandemic, we had to switch. So
Right.
it's good to have them. And it's also important to make sure if you do any kind of not hybrid meetings, it's the meeting and you're all in the meeting at the same time, so it gets in the minutes. Some congregations, and Pittsburgh Presbytery does this for our commissions, allow for email votes on routine matters, which can be really helpful if you didn't get the bill from the new contract for the garbage service before the session meeting, but you really do want to continue to have garbage collection because it could get a little questionable. You can send it out to the session and say, is there any objection to entering into this contract or renewing our contract with Waste Management? These are the terms. We need to do this before the next session meeting because our next session meeting isn't for a month and the garbage will be piling up. Just make sure that those get into the minutes. And what I tend to do is, if it was unfinished business from a meeting, I will add a note to the minutes to say, the session wanted to go into the contract, but we didn't have the final terms. Subsequently, we got these terms and the session unanimously voted. But I would do executive committee because I'm doing their minutes. Executive committee unanimously voted by email to agree to the contract, and the garbage was collected. So if it's something that comes up out of the blue, oh my gosh, something fell through the steeple, we need to have emergency roof repairs. Yes, we're going to do that. I will put those, on the next minutes. In the interim between the presbytery meetings, this action, or the executive committee meeting, this action happened and we voted this way. Email voting should not be for controversial matters. There should be a mechanism for anybody to say, hey, we can't vote by email. I want to discuss it. It's typically, trash collection comes up more than you might think. People forget to renew the trash collection.
But putting them in the minutes, just to reinforce that, is very important, because I've definitely seen that gets lost in the shuffle, right? We decided that by email 3 weeks ago. Now we're meeting again as a session, and somebody say, well, wait a minute, didn't we decide that by email? Oh yeah, that should go in the minutes. So that's one of those things to kind of keep track of, especially. Yeah.
She's coming with the microphone.
One moment, yeah.
If we have one of those emails, then I make it part of my report to say that we did that.
That's what I tend to do.
Yeah. Good. Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, I think I'm...
I don't know if others do this or not, but at the beginning, early on in the minutes, there's always a clerk's report, and I kind of have a regular standing thing where it'll be correspondence, email votes, if there's a presbytery meeting coming up, sacraments, membership updates, and it's every month all right there, and that just makes it a lot easier for me because we do use email votes a fair amount.
Yeah.
And written reports especially, you can attach them to the minutes as well. So you submit, any of the written reports, you can attach them to the minutes, and then you have it there, and all of those routine things are right there.
Yeah, I like the idea of having those regular categories, membership, correspondence, etc., for the clerk's report. That's a great tip to add to your sort of checklist on how, because you're always going to have something in each of those, or most of those columns each time. Yeah.
An example of these called emailed meetings is coming up this month, because the statistical report is due is the 16th, we don't meet until the 25th or
Mhm.
20, whatever. And as far as minutes, I will put out a called emailed meeting to say, okay, you need to approve the statistical report, and then I'll put, after I get the vote, I will put minutes for that called meeting, and then they don't go into the regular session minutes. Is that okay? That's what's been done?
Everything has to go into the session minutes, so it's not really a special called meeting because you're not. A meeting involves people being able to simultaneously exchange information, so an email vote isn't a called meeting. You could put, I prefer to have it come in the minutes, either in a clerk's report, or you can put an appendix to the minutes or something, but it really needs to go into your minutes book. And I'm jumping ahead, but this is when people talk about going into executive session. Minutes from an executive session are to be kept separately. You know what that means? They get lost. So everything really should be in your minutes.
Well, in the past, we've always had the minutes of any called email meeting in the minutes book as well.
Okay,
Session meeting, is that not right?
it's not a called email meeting because it's not a meeting.
Okay.
So, but it sounds like I'm being really picky because I'm a clerk, but that's an important part of our polity, and it's a distinction. For us, a meeting, you need to be able to simultaneously hear and communicate. So when you're doing email, it's not a meeting. It can be a vote, but it's not a meeting, and it's not a special or called, because those have particular meanings within our Book of Order and within Robert's Rules.
So maybe the way to phrase it is just reporting on email votes.
Yes.
And call it and referring to that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Want to talk about minutes and records? Okay.
I want you to.
You want me to? You'd rather? That's in my section.
I'm not highlighted for
He's
that.
not highlighted for that. If you guys saw my blood pressure raise a minute ago, it was the voting to receive. You don't need to vote to receive. The session just receives, or the congregation receives whatever it receives, because you can't go blah, 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 blah. I'm not receiving it. If it's been presented, it's been received. And so you don't have to vote to receive things. That's just one of my little pet peeves. Here's your other bonus. If you've completed your business, you don't need a motion to adjourn. You're done your business. Just adjourn. You say, well, we've completed our business.
The
Who
pastor
wants to
starts
pray
to
us
pray,
out?
it's done.
It's
Yeah.
done.
That's right.
Yeah. So there you have that. Those are my little tips for the day. Things that I noted down just to stress is one of the things that I do with looking at presbytery meetings before I form the docket for the February meeting. I look at the docket and the minutes for last February's meeting to make sure that I'm covering all of the things that we're supposed to cover in a typical February meeting. So that's very helpful. I also want to stress what Trent said a couple times. Don't hesitate to pause. You are not in the middle of CPR. Nobody is going to die if you take a minute to look at Robert's Rules or look at the Book of Order or just talk amongst yourselves. Please give yourselves that grace. Don't hesitate to say to the minister and give them that grace. Let's just look at this for a second. You make better decisions when you're better informed and you have a moment to think. So there. The guidelines for the minutes start on page 13, and I'm not going to go through all of this because we go up to like number 47. Good heavens. But just to hit a few highlights, what I can't stress enough is that minutes record what was done, not what was said. I'm a lawyer. Didn't have many things go to actual courtrooms, but when we did, we had someone who was trained to take stenography, to take verbatim information. You are probably not a trained stenographer. You cannot be expected to take down all of the debate, and you run the risk of, if you put it in the minutes, not getting it correct and someone objecting, and there you are. So debate doesn't go in the minutes. Now, can you sometimes add a little sort of editorializing to say, like, after extensive discussion, if something was just beaten to death? We occasionally do that in the presbytery minutes just to reflect that this was fully and fairly discussed, but then the vote was this. You also don't need to write down who made the motion and that it was seconded. You don't need to write down who makes the second. But please please, please, please do not try to get the debate in your minutes, because that is actually a disservice. You want your minutes to just be the decisions that were made. And people often ask for abstentions. You don't have to ask for abstentions. People are perfectly free to say, I would like it noted in the minutes that I abstained. So what is better in your minutes is not to have that there were 2 abstentions, but to say that Elder Jane Smith abstained because the proposed contract was with her husband's landscaping business. So she wants it noted in the minutes that she didn't vote on that. So you don't have to ask for abstentions with every vote, but let people know if they wish to abstain, they can certainly make that known and ask you to put it in the minutes. And it's just a matter of moving it along. We talked about money decisions being by consensus. Robert's Rules actually has rules for small boards that are a little more flexible. Most sessions qualify as small boards. And you can often do things which we've found for our routine business to say, is there any objection to this? If it's something that wasn't on the consent agenda that maybe could have been if the circumstances were better, if we had the information earlier, we could have put it on the consent agenda, but it's really not controversial. Is there any objection? And that lets people who have objections say so and move to a vote. All right, checking off the things I wanted to say. Minutes themselves, I get a lot of questions about paper. You do not have to go to Cokesbury and buy the fancy paper. What you need is acid-free paper, and most paper is acid-free. You don't want to be buying the super cheap stuff anyway. You want a nice quality paper. It's not a love-hate relationship. I have a hate-hate relationship with minute books. We don't use ours. It's printed for Pittsburgh Presbytery. I never use it. I am not making this up because we get all the records for churches that close. We have literally had 4 different people surrounding the minutes book. One person's pulling the lever, the other person's trying to push the pages down to try to get these to close and to latch and to do what they're supposed to do. And the next thing they will do is come open and your papers will be all over the place. I hate these. What we do at Presbytery is we keep working copies, and I keep the whole past year of Presbytery minutes. I have a working draft copy right at my hands in a binder. And then when we're done the year, we go through and we make sure we edit it to make sure, we found out in July that we were actually spelling so-and-so's name wrong. Let's make sure we got it correctly in all the other minutes. We make sure that we're doing things consistently, so we're not hyphenating co-chair sometimes and not other times, and we're capitalizing. We proofread it. You wouldn't believe the number of mistakes you find. Even though it's been approved by session and everybody's supposedly gone through it, you read the minutes again when you're doing the final proofread, like, that's not how you spell that word. Let's fix that. So we do that at the end of the year, and then we have them bound. We send them to a bindery. We get a lovely bound book. Check it out. Nothing's falling out. Nothing's getting out of order. Everything that we sent to the bindery is still in this binding. We do 2 years. We may move it to 3 just because we've gone from 6 Presbytery meetings a year to 4. We also make 2 copies. 2 identical copies. I make Trent sign 2 copies. We send one to Philadelphia immediately, and we keep one here so that there is a copy here, and there is already an archived copy in Philadelphia. I will talk in a little bit about sending things to Philadelphia. What you shouldn't do for your permanent storage is this. These vinyl binders. This one doesn't do it. It's not the great example. This is where I keep my Presbytery manual. But have you ever opened these binders and you're looking at a mirror image of whatever was on here? There are acids that off-gas in these. It destroys, some ink is more reactive than others, but it really is, it's destructive to the ink. If you are using this temporarily with your good copy, they recommend that you put several sheets of paper in between, so you'd have several sheets at the beginning and at the end. But this is not a long-term storage vehicle. Electronic minutes are also something that people say, well, we do it electronically now. We keep it all electronically. These are my visual aids. There's music on here. There's data on here. This is actually the session minutes from 2007. I'm not sure which church. I grabbed it from a closed church. I can't access the music on here or the data on here because we no longer have physical devices to do that. Now, I know vinyl has come back and CDs are coming back. I don't know that 8-tracks are on the horizon. I don't think this one's coming back. So I saved this from our flea market. Somebody donated this to our church flea market because, you know, somebody might want it. We also have documents on our presbytery system that we have an electronic copy of that we can no longer access because they weren't updated in the interim, and now the current software is so far ahead of what that software was that even though it's the same program from the same company, we can't open that document because it has changed so much. So online documents do require maintenance and upkeep. You have to keep updating them to the current format. Believe it or not, paper is the gold standard. And people talk about environmental issues. It's really not that cut and dry because, as you might have heard, a lot of publicity, server farms where this data is kept draw a huge amount of electricity. They do a huge amount of resources. When this paper arrived at the presbytery office and we printed it, it was done consuming resources, and it will be here for hundreds of years on the good paper. So it's really not clear that online is the environmentally responsible way to go. It is absolutely the way to do it. I don't know anybody who does typed or handwritten minutes anymore. Sure, you're going to do it on the computer, but that's not for your permanent storage. Your permanent storage, acid-free paper is still the way to go. And my folks at the Historical Society will say that over and over and over again. Acid-free paper. It's the way to go. My other gripe about these is that they're expensive. They cost hundreds of dollars. If you have filled up your minutes book and need a new one, it's going to cost hundreds of dollars. And these, see, they fell out because it wasn't put together properly. The goofy square paper is also more expensive than the paper you get, even if you splurge for the really good stuff at Staples or Office Depot. The stuff from Cokesbury is going to be way more expensive, even if Cokesbury is selling through Amazon. So it's just, I have no time for these. Well, funny you should ask. We put a note in there. Let me find it, but it's in Guidelines for Session Minutes. Bindery information is in there somewhere. We have a whole list of binderies. Page 6. Some are local, some are far away. Send them away. They're usually pretty good. The one gentleman is French if you go to the one bindery, so you get to talk. Yeah. Page 6 has the bindery information. Several different options.
Well-
Also, I just wanted to note that you can buy acid-free binders if you want to save up a few years to get enough pages. There are acid-free binders available on the internet through Amazon.
Okay, so acid-free binders are an option, or sticking some paper in between, but just not forever. But really, 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 especially those of you who are in older congregations where you haven't touched some of the old minutes in years and years and years, ship them to Philadelphia, Presbyterian Historical Society. They will catalog them and store them. They remain, while you're a going congregation, they remain your property. You can call them and say, hey, I need the minute book from 1946 to 1952. Can you send it back? And they will. All you pay are shipping costs, which they have a discounted deal, so it's not even that bad. Or if you're going to Philadelphia or you're driving to the Jersey Shore and you want to make a stop on the way in Philadelphia, you laugh, but you can go visit them. They have all kinds of wonderful exhibits and artifacts, and if you make arrangements in advance, they'll give you a tour. I went down and you can see the building itself looks sort of like a mushroom because it's kind of a small mushroom, a building on top. I know we've gone past our time, but I'll work on it. And then they have this giant underground temperature-controlled, fire-protected archive where they store all these things. And if you just need a question answered, like grandma's baptism date, they will send a researcher down. It may take a couple days, but they will send somebody down to look in the archives and figure out, what the answer is to that question and just email it. So Presbyterian Historical Society. They've come to our Presbyterian meetings. They are great. We really, really, really recommend them. Now, all of the hatred I had for these books, I love the Rolls and Register books. They are designed specifically for what you need them to do. They have all the rolls and registers you need to keep. Actually, handwriting is the easiest to do that. Some congregations do pull them out and type them, but handwriting is just fine for those. I don't know about your congregation. We get requests every couple of months. Hey, I know my grandmother was a member. We get them when it's a closed church. You'll get them if it's your church. I know my grandmother was baptized here this year. Can you find it? It's still occasionally important as far as it really comes up a lot for baptisms when people want, like, if they've converted to Catholicism but not completed the conversion, they need to know when their baptism was. So we need to send letters, and we can talk about sending letters versus certificates. But the pre-assembled books really do work best. If yours have gotten old and beaten up and are hard to handle, this is the one time when I do advise, buy a new set of books. I can help you with the transition, but we can start again with what you have, and you can keep the historical ones. Almost every congregation is going to have some kind of online database or spreadsheet. That's a tool that you use to manage, who's volunteered for the Strawberry Festival and who's doing this, or, who was a snowbird. But that is not your permanent rolls and registers. The rolls and registers book are the best possible tools for that.
There's a question.
Yes.
In our church, we have a clerk of session and a clerk of records. And I have a question from the clerk of records, and I don't understand it, so I'm just going to read it. Do you still advise sending the minutes to be stored on microfiche?
No.
Okay. That's why you're talking about all the physical binding.
I'm talking about physical bindings.
Gotcha. Thank you.
A couple of years ago, they had a big project, and they microfilmed, not the fiche, it's the film, all of the records for as many congregations as were willing to participate, and they're in our basement, and they're all in lovely little boxes, and our microfilm reader broke. And so for a while, we had to go to the seminary to use their microfilm reader, and then their microfilm reader broke. So now we have to go to Hillman Library, which in the last couple of years hasn't been super easy because it's been under construction. If we want to access those, we have to go to Hillman, say, can we use your microfilm reader? Our microfilm reader broke. I look every couple months because I think sooner or later somebody has to come up with something for a computer that you can just put it through and read it. But so far, not yet. So no, that's why we're sticking with paper. Paper's the way to go. All right, I know I've blown right past our break. So if we want to take I don't know, come back at 11, is 15 minutes good?
Sure.
Okay. I mean, if everybody is back at your seats, then we'll start earlier again, but have a refreshment, restrooms that way, and we'll start again by, how about 10:55? Okay?
That sounds good.
All right, 10:55. I know, that really made everybody quiet. We're good to go. Okay, I'm going to cover a couple things that I got during the break, because that always happens. I had a text from Leslie. I don't know where the question came from, but it was, can the annual meeting of the congregation be on Zoom? Yes, provided it's a meeting. There are some that still do it hybrid, so it has to be a meeting where everybody can see and hear each other. You can speak to each other. You can ask to be recognized and speak, and everyone can hear you. And you are all voting at the same time. There are electronic ways to do that. We're going to be getting one. Brian is still shopping because we used to use Mentimeter, but they've upped their prices. So our associate minister, Brian Wallace, our unofficial tech support, and he's looking around. But you need to have a mechanism for voting because there is never proxy voting. You can never have somebody vote for you. You can never vote in advance and turn in your ballot. You also can't, people think you can have what they used to call rolling congregational meetings. Like, well, we're going to call a new pastor and we have 3 services. So we're going to have them preach at all 3 services and then we're going to gather the votes after all the, no. You can't have 3 congregational meetings that count as one. It's one congregational meeting. It can be hybrid. Assuming now that means that if it's hybrid, the folks that are participating online have to be able to see and hear everything that's happening in the room, and they need to be able to address the folks who are in the room from wherever they are participating hybrid. question came up about whether a clerk has to be a ruling elder. Yes, we have one minister of word and sacrament who serves as a recording clerk who made a big fuss and wanted to be the clerk of session. I said, well, you can't. The book of order says must be a ruling elder. If you have a super small congregation and there's really nobody who can do it, it doesn't have to be a ruling elder who's a member of your church if your bylaws permit that. We just saw some bylaws that don't permit that, but it must be a ruling elder. And this is the next thing. Ruling elder is the type of ordered ministry. Once you are ordained as a ruling elder, you remain a ruling elder unless you ask to set that aside or you renounce jurisdiction or it is removed during discipline. Ruling elders may or may not be in active service on the session, but they are still ruling elders even if not in active service. I am a ruling elder at Southminster Presbyterian Church. I have not been on the session in more than 15 years. I remain a ruling elder. So please, 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 please don't refer to those on the session as ruling elders and those not on the session just as elders. That is not correct. We sometimes in minutes just say elder rather than ruling elder on the second reference. Just like if I refer to Trent, he gets Reverend Doctor the first time, he just gets Reverend the second time.
Or Trent.
Or Trent.
Yeah.
Now, I may switch it. His wife is a minister and works at the seminary, so some of our seminary professors, I might refer to their second reference as doctor if that's their primary function, but it's all up in the air. But no, once a ruling elder, always a ruling elder. So, yes, hold on. Wait.
This is just a quick question. What does the stated mean in stated clerk, and why aren't we stated?
The stated clerk is the term in the Book of Order for the clerk of a council above the session level. So you are a clerk of session, and for every council, which is presbytery, synod, and general assembly, their clerk is a stated clerk. Where they got that from, I don't know. The terminology is about 300 years old. But yeah, I'm the stated clerk for the presbytery. Right now, Forrest Clausen is our acting stated clerk and executive. He's permanently the executive. He's acting as stated clerk for the Synod of the Trinity, which is our synod. And Reverend Jihan O is the stated clerk for the Presbyterian Church USA. I don't know why they picked those two language differences. I don't know. But it's in the Book of Order. It says for councils above session, that person is known as the stated clerk. Going back to the ruling elder, I do want to say it's not just a language that's insignificant because the Book of Order does say, and I don't know where it is off the top of my head, some of my colleagues can say, well, in G302041B, I can't do that. But I know it's in there. That it's not, the term is not that a ruling elder rules over the congregation. They are the elected representatives of the congregation to do the business in our polity. So it is an important distinction. We did have a question.
The term ruling refers to ruling the life of the congregation according to Scripture. That's the sense of rule, and not like scepter in hand rule. So.
Yeah, so that's why it's not you're ruling while you're on the session. You're a ruling elder. Because our types of ordered ministry are distinct and the gifts that are required for them are distinct. And it is possible to be ordained as both a deacon and as an elder, ruling elder, but it is not possible to serve both of those offices at the same time. Just like many of the folks who come through our ordination process have already been ordained as ruling elders or deacons, they no longer continue in that when they become ministers of word and sacrament because you only function in one ordained office at a time. So, welcome to Presbyterian Polity. I just had a question because you all should have just gotten, the next topic is the clerk and the presbytery and representation at presbytery, notification of how many ruling elders your congregation has for the coming year. We're in a bit of a time warp because we're asking people to send that number of ruling elders. I anticipate it will be approved on the consent agenda, my plan. It's never been questioned in the past 11 years. This might be the year, but it's not a controversial plan. Not every presbytery has to do this, but Pittsburgh Presbytery has a lot of ministers members because we have a seminary, we have a large number of congregations. We're a fairly large presbytery. We also have a number of educational institutions and medical institutions that have a number of chaplains serving. So we have lots of minister members, and we're supposed to have parity, same number of minister members and ruling elders coming to be presbyters and vote at the meeting. Now, if everybody who was entitled to showed up, we wouldn't know what to do with everyone because there'd be about 600 people there. We have around 300-ish minister members. What we do in the parity is I subtract the ones that are, in the nursing home, they can't get around, or they live in Florida, things like that. And then we have to have that same number of ruling elders. Well, if we go by membership from our congregations, that doesn't get us there. So you see the math in my report. We also enroll people based on their roles in presbytery function. The thought is if you're serving on the executive committee, or Ted has served on an administrative commission, if you're in a role like that, you should have a voice and a vote in presbytery because you're serving presbytery in another capacity. You should be able to have your own voice and vote and not be a member just depending on who's your commission. Some congregations elect commissioners for the entire year. Some do it meeting by meeting. Some do it by guilt and intimidation. They sort of send the note around and say, we're going to keep sending this around until somebody signs up. It doesn't have to be someone who is a ruling elder who is currently serving on session. It can be a ruling elder who was ordained in another church and joined your church, is still a ruling elder, loves to go to presbytery meetings for whatever reason. So that person can be your commissioner. You also get commissioners by rotation because even when I add in by membership, because our congregations aren't as big as they used to be, and by all the folks who are serving on our commissions and committees, I don't have enough. So I go through and everybody takes a turn and I give another ruling elder to congregations that have sent at least one ruling elder to at least one meeting in the past year. The floor is really, it's low bar. But, and you get that note when you say by membership you have one commissioner. That can be anyone the session chooses. By rotation you have another commissioner. That can be anyone the session chooses. By equalized elders, these are your equalized elders. That has to be those people. And I just did get notice some folks change membership. That follows them to their new church of membership. We change the forms and members. I had a congregation call me and say, we really don't like Bob. I know he's serving on your commission on ministry, but we don't like him. We don't think he's going to vote the way we want him to vote. We want to send somebody else in his place. And I said, no. You can send whoever you choose for your commissioners by membership and rotation, but that's Bob's seat because he's on the commission on ministry, so that's for him alone. So that is the explanation of that. And I didn't make that up. Somebody actually called and I had to sit there. Sometimes in my office, I look around, I'm like, there must be a camera. I think I'm being punked. You did not just call.
I'm thinking of all the Bobs I know now.
Bob was not the name.
Yeah.
I'm trying to protect the guilty. So you should have all just gotten the notice and then the packet just went out. We changed. We're actually not following our manual. Our manual required us to mail it out. I found out, I thought I was going out on a limb, that people would hate it. It'd be this big fuss because it was so expensive to print and mail out presbytery packets that are this thick. So many clerks of session called me and said, thank you, why haven't we doing this for years? It is so much easier for me to just email it on to the person who's going to the meeting. So it's always on the website. We're meeting by Zoom. This time around we don't have visitors, but we put it on the live stream. You can watch. You can look at all the materials. I already did the staff reports. And I don't actually have to pay a kickback to the person who raised the deadline for the statistical report. It is coming up. You need to get it done. You need to get it approved by your session, even if by email vote to get it done. This is what per capita is based on. So every year we get indignant calls and letters. Our membership is not X number. We only have this many people. You need to change it. I said, well, did you submit your statistical report? Well, no, I don't do that. Well, that's why. Because if you don't submit it, they will carry on whatever you had the last year, and that will be your number. Please submit your statistical report. Once the deadline passes for clerks to be able to enter, we have a small window where we can make corrections. The numbers don't have decimal points. One of our clerks entered them as if they had decimal points. So it looked like one of our small churches suddenly had a multi-million-dollar budget, and we went, I don't think that's right. something's wrong here. And we called and we said, Miss So-and-so, did you maybe put decimal points in? Because they don't recognize that. And she said, yes. And I said, good, we can fix it. Otherwise, we're like, so where'd you get all this money? Can we talk about it? So we have a very small window, but once that window passes, it is done. We cannot go in and make changes. So please do your statistical report. In the last few years, they have not been doing a clerk's questionnaire with it. They just ask you for more information. But one of the things they are asking you, they used to ask all kinds of other like research questions. They're not doing that. I think it was just too much with the statistical report. We ask you for some information to update our records. One of the things we ask for is a list of your session members. We're not trying to just be nebby. It is helpful, especially in cases of emergency. We've had situations, especially in congregations that don't have continuing pastoral leadership, where the clerk of session runs everything. Suddenly, the clerk of session gets the call, mom fell, broke her hip. She takes off to take care of mom in North Carolina. We can't reach anybody. The congregation doesn't have a phone number anymore. We don't know what to do. So having that session contact list is very helpful. And it's also helpful if we have the contact information, because sometimes you call, oh, you should call Bob. I'll give Bob a good name from our congregation. Bob Smith is really experienced in that. He could be a big help. How do we get in touch with Bob? If we have that information, it's really good to have it. So please, Leslie's the person to talk to. Get it done. Don't complain to me if you don't get it done and your number's not right. We did just announce the annual review. We've got the spring dates. For our fall dates, we have to wait until Pitt football gets its act together because we rent out our parking lots. We're going to do the spring ones here. We've experimented a little bit with holding them in churches, but it gets a little more difficult when we need to get copies and things. So for the spring at least, because my spring is really kind of jam-packed, we're doing them here. But we're doing, again, it was very popular to have a weekday afternoon, so we're trying that again. Please fill out the forms in advance. The forms I put out there probably won't be the forms you'll be using this time around, because we may just add in, there are required policies I'm going to talk about in a minute that we'll be asking about. But please fill them out in advance and print out 2 copies. If we're at the Presbytery office, we can make another copy if you don't. But if you show up without having done the homework, we will ask you to please make another appointment. We are doing the online option. Please talk to Leslie if you want to do that. And there's confusion every year because rolls and registers, it says minutes page, and there's no minutes pages. The rolls and registers are not paginated. Those are for actions. You only have to fill it in the column. If those are actions like baptisms that require session action. So you can show the correlation on this page of the session minutes at this meeting, they authorize the baptism. Here's where it is, and here's where it was reported. All right, I don't want to. So you give a lawyer a microphone and we're behind. No, it's not out there already. It needs to go to it's just going to be an addition and we'll try to add it on at the end. Nothing else has changed. It's just additional policies that we'll talk about in just a little bit.
Okay, I think I'm up again.
You're up again.
So talking about the annual review of call. So this is one of those annual requirements that would go on that calendar of regular actions if you were to keep such a thing. So the session is responsible to review the adequacy of the pastor's compensation on an annual basis. And if there are changes then to the terms of call, they make a recommendation to the congregation to vote on that. If you have a temporary pastor or any kind of pastor that's under a contract and not terms of call, then that obviously doesn't need to go to the congregation. That is a decision the session itself makes. But it's important that there is a process in place for doing this, not only to ensure that minimum terms of call are achieved, but also it's a requirement that you would look at this every year, and that circumstances change. Sometimes it's very much performance-based in terms of possible increases, and sometimes it's completely separate from sort of the annual review. But regardless, the session's responsible for that. So this would be one of those things as a clerk that you would be keeping an eye out on to see that it happens. Obviously, you have to sort of backtrack, right? Because if the annual meeting is where you report on the budget, which has already been approved, you're probably approving the budget in your November or December session meeting, which means that the review of the terms have to happen sometime before that as well, right? So again, as I mentioned before, if there's no change to the terms of call, that there doesn't need to be a vote on the terms of call, but probably the fact that it hasn't changed should be reported to the congregation. The whole sticky thing of making the pastor leave the room while you talk about him or her and discuss terms of call, you know, most places that I've been, certainly the pastor is asked to leave, and there's a provision for the clerk to basically moderate the meeting during that time. But you know, maybe that's something to discuss ahead of time, how that's going to be handled, especially if it's a new pastor who might have different expectations. Discuss it ahead of time so there's not that awkward moment in the meeting where different expectations are in play. I've been a pastor for 30 years, and I think there's been one time when I was an interim in one church where I was gathering my things to leave the room and said, "Oh no, you don't need to leave." I'm like, huh. So the other 29 years, I've been asked to wait in the hall. You can talk to me afterwards, my true feelings about all that another time. But anyway, so that's an important thing, to just ensure that the review happens and that the appropriate steps as necessary happen after that. The other item that I'm sorry.
Now, when the pastor leaves the room, the congregation can't make any changes because the session already voted on it, right? The pastor's terms of call.
So that's a tricky one.
Yeah.
The session has voted on it. The congregation does have to approve any changes to the terms of call. However, that has already been negotiated by the session and the pastor. I don't think it's going to be a great relationship if a congregation unilaterally says, well, we're going to cut the pay by 20%. There might be areas to talk about. In those situations where people think it's going to come up, I have advised that this is a yes or no by the congregation. They can approve or say no. If they say no, it's back to a season of negotiation between the session and the minister, and please call the presbytery as soon as the meeting is over, because this is when we will help you navigate this. But there shouldn't be amendments. It's more often, I said 20% cut, but it's more often, well, we want to give so-and-so a bonus, or we want to give them a couple blah, blah, blah. Okay, maybe if you're going to give them an extra day at Christmas, you don't have to. But really, if there's any changes, it should be negotiated with the session and the pastor.
So, did you have a follow-up? I'm sorry.
Then they can be on the committee to make the budget next year.
Well, that is frequently, when you call for objections, set forward to volunteer to work on this.
So just to follow up to that, if it is, goes back to the planning and anticipating and organizing stuff that we've been talking about. I mean, if there's some buzz or anticipation that such a motion, I mean, if there's dissatisfaction with the pastor, right, and somebody's going to be objecting to it, that's probably actually a case to have another minister moderate the meeting, at least for that part of it. Because it also, if you're standing in as the clerk during that time, there's an inherent sort of conflict there. You're a member of the congregation. So I've been in a situation like that. I was an associate pastor years ago where there was unhappiness, let's say, with the pastor. And we knew this was going to come up in an annual meeting, and the pastor was very wise to invite another minister member of the presbytery who was very experienced and respected and known by the congregation to moderate that meeting. It also would have been possible for me as the associate to moderate, but that also would have put me in a very difficult position, right, to moderate a discussion about my supervisor's performance, right? So in that case, we knew this was brewing. We knew this was happening. We had the pastor invited another minister member to moderate the meeting, and that diffused the situation. Some recommendations were sent back to the session to explore some things and so on, but it wasn't it wasn't just decided with the pastor out of the room and come back and he's now lost 20% of his salary, for example. So those are things that you could do, and that's where a call to the stated clerk to say, we have this meeting, we're expecting some trouble, possibly, can you help me think through this? How can we handle this?
And presbytery staff can come moderate the meeting. I can moderate meetings. Members and past members of our commission on ministry can moderate congregational meetings because they all have to be after church, and church has to be at 11 a.m. And so even though we have a lot of ministers, we run short sometimes. But that is especially a situation where the expertise of presbytery staff can be very helpful. So I sometimes go to meetings even if there's just a little hint of there might be an issue, or there might be questions that the pastor feels that they can't, not just about compensation. I went to one a couple weeks ago where there might be questions about something they're doing. I was just there, didn't have to be called on. It was great, just went to worship, but I was there if need be. So please call the presbytery office sooner rather than later if you think something's brewing. She's coming.
Well, it just gets on the recording that way. Yeah.
Okay, this has never happened to us, hope it never does or anything, but if the in the congregational meeting, the terms of call, they want to give an extra little bump or something, who knows, and the congregation approves that at the meeting, then the session goes back and reworks the budget. Is it necessary to have another congregational meeting to allow the congregation to receive the revised budget?
No, because you are just responsible for updating the congregation about the budget. They do not need to receive it. As we discussed, you don't have to vote to receive things. You need to keep them updated if they have taken that action. Now, as a representative of the session, the clerk can say, listen, the session set up the budget. We know you love Pastor so-and-so, but we don't have the money to give them a 50% raise. We can't do it. Let's table this and let's see. Maybe there is something we can do. Maybe we can give them an additional time of study leave, or maybe we can give them something that would be valuable to them and easier for the congregation to do, because all they would have to financially pay is, the pulpit supply and something during that time. So if it's anything substantial, more than just like, we'd like to give him, the day after Christmas this year as an extra date. Okay, that's not going to be a budget impact. It's the end of the year, whatever. But anything beyond something simple like that, it's negotiated between the pastor and the session. Even though the congregation has to approve it, you really can't impose terms on either side, because the session's responsible for coming up with the budget. The pastor has to be willing to work for those terms. So it's really not up to the congregation to come up with new terms on the fly at the congregational meeting. They have the ability to say, no, we don't accept these terms, go back and work on it some more. But they don't have the ability to craft it. And we don't do our best work on the spur of the moment trying to throw things together.
In fact, that might be a response to somebody wanting to make an amendment, is to remind them that this is really an up or down vote. And if you don't like these terms, the best way to do it is vote no. It then goes back to the session for them to do more work on it with the pastor. So
I think we have another question. Leslie, hold on. Leslie's getting her steps in.
Is it just one no that will send it back?
Oh, no. No.
No. It
would have to be the majority voted no. No.
Yeah. All votes are majority votes. Now, if I'm the pastor in the hallway and it was a 70-30 vote, I'm going to be looking to go somewhere else. But that's another story. Yeah.
And that's again, right. The pastor's probably already going to be on the phone to the presbytery because they're already probably updating their PDP. So call the presbytery. Hey, we had a fairly high vote. That's an indication of some either dissatisfaction or financial issues, or let's see what's going on there. But that's a barometer that there's something going on.
I mean, the same happens when a congregation elects their pastor. Sometimes there'll be even a motion that we cast a unanimous ballot because they want, and sometimes people will object, like, no, we should register the 3 no votes or whatever it was for the pastor. So.
Because there's almost always a no vote. Every time somebody gets elected, Presbytery-wide, there's always a no vote. I had 4. And when I was first called, I don't remember any of the other votes, but I remember that one because I've been reelected to new terms. We're coming to the end, so I'm just going to hit the highlights of some of this stuff. We have, starting on page 32, a whole big discussion on church and civil law. One of the things this past year, 2025, was when they changed from doing decennial reporting every 10 years on the years ending with 1 to annual corporate reporting. I stood at every Presbyterian meeting. I put it in my report. I did everything I could think of to do. We put it in newsletters, and people still called and said, nobody told us. So every year, by June 30th, you need to do an annual report filed with the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, letting know who your corporate officers are. People say, well, what's the big deal? Well, you could lose your corporate name. I don't know that anybody's standing in line to get your corporate name, but that is where folks are going to look. If you're entering into a big construction contract to put on the new roof and do this and that, they are going to call up your corporate report and find out who your corporate officers are, because they are going to want those people to sign that contract. So that's why you really need to keep it updated. Make sure you have who your corporate officers are. If you don't know who your corporate officers are, check your bylaws. If it doesn't say in your bylaws, give me a call and we'll work on that. I mentioned earlier that I'm a lawyer. I'm general counsel for the Presbytery, which means I'm the Presbytery's lawyer. I can provide sort of legal triage sometimes and say, yeah, you really need to talk to an experienced property lawyer about that, or you really need to do this. I can provide kind of general guidance about things like child and youth protection laws. That was a big deal when I started in 2015. I think people are pretty good with clearances and all policies that are required. The most recent General Assembly, and this is something that we will be adding to our checklist for session minutes, now requires a policy for adults with vulnerabilities. I don't like the term. I wish they'd used vulnerable adults, because that is a term of art that other people understand. Adults with vulnerabilities is very vague, because all of us have our vulnerabilities. But what we are trying to do is protect folks who need protection, and that is actually wider because a lot of seniors have vulnerabilities. They need protection. You, as with children and youth, you need to review these policies. I suggest every year. And you need to make sure that they function for your context. If you start a new program, if you change your physical plant, if you do things like that, you need to make sure that they're keeping up with what your programs are. And you might not think about it, well, we just have the senior luncheon every other Wednesday. Well, okay, there may be vulnerable adults in that context. How do we protect their interests? They also require, here before I go, okay.
Neurodiverse persons are also considered vulnerable.
Yes.
We have some adults in our congregation.
That's why vulnerable adults has sort of a not approved, because it's not approved by anyone, but it's sort of generally accepted definition. It includes neurodiversity, it includes cognitive decline, it includes physical limitations. So yeah, it covers all of that. For clearances for children and youth work, for your employees and your volunteers, I recommend you keep them permanently. They're always changing statutes of limitations and things. Keep them permanently. If you keep them electronically, make sure that you can still access them. They're in a format you can access. If you keep them on paper and they have social security numbers on them, make sure they are locked so that not anybody can get in. I would actually, you might want to consider blacking out the social security number for your records. I know it makes it a little bit less of, you might have a slight problem. Depends on if you're able to lock them, leave it in, keep them locked. That's the best. But if a lot of people have access to them, look at protecting the information on them. Social security numbers need to be really, really protected in all of your employee information, things like that. The other things that came in were requirements for an anti-racism policy. And they call it a harassment policy. I call it an anti-harassment policy because we don't want to encourage harassment. We have both of those at the Presbytery level. So we have examples of that, and they are, context specific to your congregation. There is also a requirement for boundary training every 36 months for your session, which must include sexual misconduct and child abuse prevention. So you need to be looking at having that every 36 months. And the question we often get is, well, we don't have any, session training. Well, there's an example of something you have to do every 36 months when you fill out your form. There's a whole lot of other stuff in there that's very specific. Call me if you have questions, but we're almost out of time. Two things I wanted to point out. You might hear the term covenant pastor in Pittsburgh Presbytery. That's another type of temporary pastor. You will not see that in the national database. When you look up someone who you consider to be a covenant pastor in the national database, it will say temporary. We use covenant because we realized we had some folks who'd been the temporary pastor of a particular congregation for 30 years. That's a long time. We use covenant when it's anticipated to be more of a long-term relationship, but for whatever reason, it can't be installed. Whether the congregation is uncertain about how long they can support this, sometimes because there's a requirement for installed pastors that they be in the Board of Pensions health plan. You know, if your spouse works for Google and you got really good health benefits, you may prefer to have a different arrangement. So covenant is only, some other presbyteries, we stole it from Donegal, other presbyteries have adopted it, but you won't see that nationally. But I just want to make sure people are aware of that. And also, if you get into a pastoral coverage emergency, if you know now that your pastor will be taking vacation for 2 weeks in July, that does not constitute an emergency. You got time to call and get somebody in there. And luckily with the seminary, we do have resources. There's seminarians can preach. We have some ruling elders who can serve communion, and I am now one of them. I am authorized to officiate at the table presbytery-wide. But we keep a list, I call it our stealth pulpit supply list, of folks who don't want to be on the published pulpit supply list because they might have some mobility limitations, they might travel a lot. But we have in the back of our minds some folks that we can call. So if you get the call that your pastor has had to start driving to North Carolina because mom fell and broke her hip, give us a call. We might be able to help you find someone who might be able to cover who's not on our typical pulpit supply list. Because the folks on the pulpit supply list get booked up really, really fast. All right, we are like, boom, right up at the end. Any last minute questions, Carla?
Off the wall question, but
Oh, go.
when we do that corporate reporting, if there are no changes, does it recognize that we have gone in and checked it?
Yes.
Okay.
You have to affirmatively go in. Now, I think so, but since last year was the first year we had to do it, I don't know what the program looks like. I'm going to try to do it because we just changed our corporate officers for Presbytery because they're our president and vice president are the co-chairs of our executive committee. It was Trent for a while. He got to sign stuff. So it's been a busy time for my office is always really busy in the beginning of the year. On my list to do is to go in and see what that looks like because for all of us, it was brand new. Last year it was the first time we entered it. I don't know if there's a box to check if there's no changes or something. So I'll let you know if I find out any information.
Okay, thanks.
Anybody else? All right. I think we're done. Whew. Deep breath. Thank you all for coming. Just about on time. Anybody feel led to close us in prayer? They're turning it. That was God.
Oh.
Do you want to close us in prayer?
And we don't need a motion to adjourn.
No, we don't need a motion to adjourn. Did you just turn off the microphone? You want to come out here? Use mine? No?
Here she is.
Thank you.
Actually filmed for the pastor when she's out, so. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for this time together. We thank you for their safe travel to and from the meeting. We thank you for the information and the knowledge that is here within the presbytery that we may call upon to do your work. We can do nothing without you, but we can do everything with you. So we thank you and praise you. Amen.